Hi guys, Mrs. Ebinger here. Hope everybody's doing well. It's a beautiful day outside today. Hope you can get outside and get some fresh air. Mr. Ebinger and I went on a 5-mile hike today. It was awesome. So I'm getting ready to read from our book again, Monster Street. And if you remember from chapter 5, Max was going into the woods with Jade. He's not really supposed to be going into the woods, is he? Because his grandparents told him not to. But let's see what happens in chapter 6. It's called I Don't Eat Meat. The man's deep, threatening voice made Max's and Jade's blood curdle. They slowly turned, knowing they had nowhere to hide. I said, "What are you doing here, Jade?" the stranger asked again, slamming his work shovel into the ground. He was clean-shaven, tall as a doorway, and his overall straps dripped over his shoulders like denim waterfalls. Jade stepped forward toward him defenselessly. "Dad, we're just walking and—" "I've told you to stay away from these woods. They're not safe," her father admonished. "And how many times have I told you not to talk to strangers?" He peered down at Max suspiciously. The farmer's eyes were the grayest Max had ever seen. Grayer than a storm cloud. I'm sorry, Mr. Howler," Max apologized. "I'm staying next door with my grandpa and Grammy, and your daughter was just—" "You're a Blood Knight boy?" he interjected. Max nodded. Mr. Howler stared at him. All the more reason to stay away from my daughter, then," Mr. Howler warned, jabbing his finger into Max's chest. "You keep on your side of the pumpkin patch, and we won't have any problems. Understand?" He grabbed Jade's arm and began leading her across the field toward their house. She glanced back at Max, embarrassed, and mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." At dinner that evening, Gramps and Grammy sat at the heads of the table, spooning food out of a half a dozen bowls and passing them around to Max. He stared down at his plate of juicy meat and couldn't help thinking about how that very meat had been walking around on a farm earlier that morning in the form of a living, breathing hog. It was the first time he had ever seen his food before it was butchered. "Ain't you going to eat, boy?" Gramps' gruff voice boomed out of the other end of the table. I don't eat meat," Max confessed, wishing his mom had stayed for dinner to explain his dietary habits. "Don't eat meat?" Gramps asked. "I'm a vegetarian," Max said. Gramps laughed in a hearty chuckle, but soon he realized that Max wasn't joking. The old man leaned back in his chair and squinted at Max, sizing him up. "How are you supposed to grow right if you don't eat meat?" Gramps asked. "I get protein in other ways, like cashews and protein shakes and—" Max stopped when he saw the incredulous look on Gramps' face. "We have mashed potatoes and green beans in those bowls beside you," Grammy chimed in, trying to break the tension. "And by the way, did you have a nice look around the farm this afternoon?" Max wanted to ask Gramps and Grammy about everything that Jade had told him. The disappearances 12 years ago, if they had ever seen the man-wolf, and why everyone was so afraid of the eastern forest. But he wasn't sure how to bring it all up. I met the neighbors," Max said. "The girl next door and I went walking around, and she said that—" Before Max could finish, Gramps set down his fork and turned to Max. "Listen to me, Max. You need to stay away from those folks," Gramps chided. "You can't trust anyone around here. It's safer for all of us that way." "Yes, you better stay on the side of the pumpkin patch," Grammy added. "Well, why?" Max asked. "Does it have something to do with the disappearances of 12 years ago?" Gramps and Grammy exchanged a surprised look. They didn't say anything for a long time. Then Grammy put her palm to her forehead and moaned, "Darn migraines." She took a pill from a prescription bottle in her pocket, put it in her mouth, then glanced out the window toward the horizon. "It's past sunset," she said. "Gramps, don't forget to lock up the barn after dinner, just in case the moon should be coming up any minute now." Gramps glanced at the rifle case in the corner of the room. He then grunted as he tore a piece of meat into his teeth. Max thought it was a peculiar exchange, but didn't say anything. He assumed that locking the barn before nightfall was a normal chore on the farm, but something about it felt odd, like they were hiding something from him, something secret. Why are they so afraid of seeing the full moon? Then he remembered his conversation with his mom earlier that day. "Mom said that you had some things of my father's that you wanted to pass down to me," he said. "Oh, that's why I'm here, isn't it?" "Well, we're still working on getting it all together," Gramps replied. "Yes, dear," Grammy added. "We want it to be a surprise." Later that night, Max lay in bed, watching a moth flutter against the hissing lantern on his nightstand. The cool night air swept through the screen of his open window, rustling the pages of a book resting atop a nearby shelf. The sounds of the night were unfamiliar to him: crickets, frogs, cicadas, and owls. Back in the city, Max could only hear sirens and horns as he fell asleep every night. Soon he heard something stir outside. He sat up and he looked out the window and saw Gramps locking up the barn. A few moments later, Max heard Gramps come back inside the cabin and start talking to Grammy. Quietly, Max climbed out of his bed and cracked open his door. He saw Gramps and Grammy standing in the den below, their faces aglow with drowsy light from the candle Grammy held in her hands. He could faintly hear their voices. "His mother said he doesn't fit in at school," the woman whispered. "Said he seems lonely." "His father was the same," Gramps returned. "Well, do you think it's too dangerous for him to be here?" Grammy asked. "I mean, he hasn't learned how to protect himself yet." "Better here with us than anywhere else," Gramps said. "We just have to keep him away from the forest and the neighbors." "And everything will go as planned." Max heard them walk up the stairs toward their bedroom at the end of the hall. He pushed his ear harder against the door, and he heard Grammy's voice once again. "Well, you really think he's ready to know the truth about what happened to his pa in these woods?" she asked. "We don't have much choice now. The full moon will be at its peak on the third night, and the new beast will arrive. We have to make sure that Max is ready to protect himself. The talismans can only help so much," Gramps said. Then Max heard their bedroom door click shut. "The new beast will arrive?" Max repeated in his mind, chilled by the words. "Protect himself? And what talisman?" A moon-scented breeze seeped through his window screen and rushed over him. He looked out toward the veiled forest. "What happened to you in those woods, Dad?" he murmured. Uncomfortable, he unzipped his hoodie and tossed it onto a nearby chair. "Silly hocus pocus," he scoffed, skeptical of what Gramps had said about the hoodies somehow being able to protect him. Max then lifted the silver dagger from the nightstand and hid it in his top drawer. "As soon as they go to sleep, I'm going to look around the house for answers," Max thought. "If I can figure out what Grammy and Gramps are talking about, then maybe I can find out what happened to my dad." He watched the full moon peeking over the horizon. His mouth stretched into a yawn, and he lay back down in bed and closed his eyes. Sometime in the night, he awoke to a ghostly howl just outside his window. That is the end of Chapter 6. I'm hoping you're enjoying this book, Monster Street, because I think it's a very good book. Chapter 7 is called Missing. I will start chapter 7 the next time we get together. Bye, guys. Have a great night.